Okay, so we will start with the next para. Last November, last September 21, as the northern hemisphere tilted away from the sun, scientists reported with unprecedented distress that the North Polar ice cap is falling off a cliff. One study estimated that it could be completely gone during summer in less than 22 years. Another new study to be presented by the US Navy researchers later this week warns it would happen in as little as 7 years from now. So many a times we compare the ice caps or the icebergs in the Arctic or even in the northern hemisphere to assess the health of the Earth. Okay, last September 21, what happened? Most of the polar ice cap had fallen and it had melted. Once ice caps or icebergs starts melting, what happens? It will swell the level, it will swell the water body swell and submerge the nearby place. And also due to heat, the water expands. See, and all the time, it's not just because of the conversion of ice cubes, ice in the form of cubes into water. Many times it's because of the expansion of water due to heat, the water swells, the water bodies swell and submerge the nearby places. And one study said that the entire ice caps of the northern hemisphere will melt within 22 years. Another research by US Navy says it will melt within 7 years from the day of their research. In the last few months, it has been harder and harder to misinterpret the signs that our world is spinning out of kilter. Major cities in North and South America, Asia and Australia are nearly out of water due to massive droughts and melting glaciers. So he tries to say that we have not acknowledged the threat or danger that we people are experiencing. Instead, we are neglecting it. So last September 21 happens to be the International Day of Peace. All of you make a note of it. September 21 happens to be the International Day of Peace. And kilter here refers to balance or harmony. So what has this resulted in? It has resulted in severe droughts on one side and floods on the other. Okay, that is its impact. On one hand, there will be droughts. On the other hand, there will be lot of floods. Desperate farmers are losing their livelihoods. Peoples in the frozen Arctic and on low-lying Pacific islands are planning evacuations of places they have long called home. Evacuations means they are leaving, not willfully but forcefully, because if they continue to stay there, they will either be killed by flood or through drought. Therefore, they are migrating to a better place. Unprecedented wildfires have forced 500,000 people from their homes in one country and caused a national emergency that almost brought down the government in another. So the situation is so severe that it brought down the government because of the emergency kind of situation due to climate change. Climate refugees. See, look at this expression, climate refugees. Usually we used to call it as war refugees or partition refugees, okay, or ethnic refugees. Here the author uses Al Gore uses the word climate refugees, because when it comes to war, partition or religious based refugees, there will be some boundaries, but this climate refugee is for everybody, it is applicable for everybody. Climate refugees have migrated into areas already inhabited by people with different cultures, regions and traditions, increasing the potential for conflict. See, what happens if people belonging to different culture sit in one or settle down in one place is, it leads to a lot of cultural conflicts. It will lead to another problem. Stronger storms in the Pacific and Atlantic have threatened whole cities. Millions have been displaced by massive flooding in South Asia, Mexico, and 18 countries in Africa. As temperature extremes have increased, tens of thousands have lost their lives. We are recklessly burning and clearing our forests and driving more and more species into extinction. The very web of life on which we depend is being ripped and frayed. So this expression is very important. Use this in your answers. The very web of life on which we depend is being ripped and frayed. Means we are bringing our own death. It's almost a suicidal attempt, it says, because across the world there is either, see, in the previous para we discussed about droughts, here it is flooding. Both are equally destructive. We never intended to cause all the destruction, just as Alfred Nobel never intended that dynamite be used for waging war. He had hoped his invention would promote human progress. We shared that some worthy goal when we began burning massive quantities of coal than oil and methane. So he says, time and again he compares himself, or he tries to compare his life with that of Alfred Nobel. He says, just like how Alfred Nobel didn't think that his invention dynamite will be used for destructive purposes. Initially, Alfred Nobel thought that his dynamite could be used for constructive purposes like constructing the dams, from making bridges. For example, if you want to construct roads or dams, you have to you will come across huge boulders and you should destroy it, and it is humanly possible. So if you use dynamite, you can destroy it. So he thought it could be used for some constructive purpose, but unfortunately people use for destructive purpose. So similarly, he says, we shared the same worthy goal when we began burning massive quantities of coal, then oil and methane. So he says, we burnt, or we started using more of coal, oil and methane in order to help human beings progress, or in order to reduce the workload of human beings. But unfortunately, it is bringing our own downfall. Even in Nobel's time, there were a few warnings of the likely consequences. One of the very first winners of the prize in chemistry worried that we are evaporating our coal mines into the air. After performing 10,000 equations by hand, Swant Arrhenius calculated that Earth's average temperature would increase by many degrees if we doubled the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this caution is already given by the first winner of the Nobel Prize in chemistry. He said, if we continue to do so, our Earth's temperature will increase if in case we double the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. 70 years later, my teacher Roger Reville and his colleague Dave Keeling began to precisely document the increasing carbon dioxide levels day by day. See what happens if there is increase in carbon dioxide. Human beings need oxygen, okay, and if there is more carbon dioxide, we will have, most of us will face breathing problems. So you should be aware of his teacher, Al Gore's teacher and colleague. If in case of online test, you will have they will ask you factual questions, all facts related questions, you should be aware of it. But unlike most of the forms of pollution, carbon dioxide is invisible, tasteless and odorless, which has helped keep the truth about what it is doing to our climate out of sight and out of mind. So this is one of the reasons why people are not serious about this climate emergency. We are not serious about this climate emergency because carbon dioxide is invisible, tasteless and odorless. The human tendency is out of sight is like out of mind. So only when it is present before you, where you can see, feel and touch, you will be cautious about it. When you can't do all this, you will not be cautious. The same thing is happening with the increasing levels of carbon dioxide. Moreover, the catastrophe now threatening us is unprecedented, and we often confuse the unprecedented with the improbable. Unprecedented means what? Something that has never happened before. There is a precedent means what? A similar situation like this has happened before. Unprecedented means a situation like this has never happened before, and we are confusing this unprecedented event into improbable. What do you mean by improbable? Something that you can't assess clearly. Probability means you can say 50% chance of me winning the class, winning the match. Okay, that is probability. Improbable means you can't decide. So people are mistaking this unprecedented event where they can act and resolve it to improbability. If they say it's improbable, they can escape from acting. So that's why they're using the word improbable. We also find it hard to imagine making the massive changes that are now necessary to solve the crisis. And when large truths are genuinely inconvenient, whole societies can, at least for a time, ignore them. Massive changes that are now necessary to solve the crisis. So he says, at present, there is a need for massive changes to solve the crisis. And when large truths are genuinely inconvenient, whole societies can, at least for a time, ignore them. So he's trying to say we have to put in our efforts, and despite putting our efforts, if it's beyond our hands, then it is acceptable. But now we can't ignore them. Yet, as George Orwell reminds us, sooner or later, a false belief bumps up against solid reality, usually on a battlefield. So only when the real war is experienced by us, only then we will realize. For example, if there is floods, at that time if you act, what is the point? See, you have disaster management department itself under government of India. So nobody can prevent disaster. You can only manage it. For example, nobody can prevent earthquakes. Nobody can prevent, and nobody will get to know when it will happen. You will only get indications. Nobody can prevent floods like tsunami, but you can manage, you can reduce the disaster. See, when tsunami happened, Americans knew that there was an earthquake in the ocean bed, but they didn't inform the Indian authorities and the coastal authorities, because Indians had not signed a treaty for sharing the information. So if they had informed, we could have prevented many people being killed. Okay, so one thing you should understand, we can't prevent natural disasters, we can only manage it, and we can reduce the deaths. In the years since this prize was first awarded, the entire relationship between humankind and the earth has been radically transformed. And still, we have remained largely oblivious to the impact of our cumulative actions. So it says, since the Nobel Peace Prize or the Nobel Prize was started, there is some orientation towards serving the mankind amongst the scientists. Okay, entire relationship between humankind and the earth has been radically transformed. So people are doing something or inventing something or discovering something for the sake of betterment of the human race. Indeed, without realizing it, we have begun to wage war on the earth itself. Now we and the earth's climate are locked in a relationship familiar to war planners, mutually assured destruction. So he says, in war, what happens? Instead of protecting the earth, we have started fighting with the earth itself, fighting against the earth itself. Now we and the earth's climate are locked in a relationship familiar to war planners. What happens? Now, on the one hand, you can't reduce the consumption of fuel, okay, and other aspects which are leading to the climate change. On the other hand, you have to save Earth's atmosphere. So you have to think of alternate ways where you can focus on this. So if the same war continues, as they say, war is mutually destructive. That is what Al Gore also tells. It leads to mutually assured destruction. More than 2 decades ago, scientists calculated that nuclear war could throw so much debris and smoke into the air that it would block life-giving sunlight from our atmosphere, causing a nuclear winter. Their eloquent warnings here in Oslo helped galvanize the world's resolve to halt the nuclear arms race. So he mentions about a success story where scientists highlighted the importance of preventing the nuclear war and preventing nuclear arms race among the leaders of the world when 2 days ago, 2 decades ago. So what happens if there is a nuclear bomb explosion? The explosive materials will block the sky, and even it will even block the sunlight, which will lead to the death of life itself. So because of these warnings, the leaders of the world came up with this treaty, nuclear arms treaty. According to this treaty, and even there was a lot of dispute with India also. India wanted to join this nuclear top 5 nations, nuclear powered nations, but India had to sign an agreement that it will not use this nuclear technology for creating nuclear weapons. But India said, we will not give you anything in writing, but we will assure that we will not be the first people who will be using nuclear weapons. So that was not accepted by the developed countries, and still India is out of this nuclear arms association. I'm not getting the exact term. By next class, I will let you know what is that association of countries called as. Now, science is warning us that that if we do not quickly reduce the global warming pollution that is trapping so much of the heat our planet normally radiates back out of the atmosphere, we are in danger of creating a permanent carbon summer. So what is the science telling now? Science is telling that there will be global warming pollution that is trapping so much of it. See, what happens? Sunlight which comes from the sun to the earth, okay, will be absorbed, and it should get evaporated through water bodies, and it forms cloud. Once it evaporates, it's formed clouds, and then there will be rain. But due to blockage of this ozone layer, what happens? Evaporation will not take properly, and sun rays will not come. So this will lead to permanent carbon summer. As the American poet Robert Frost wrote, some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice, either he notes would suffice. He says either. He is making reference to Robert Frost saying, when he says world will either end in ice or fire, means either it will become completely a kind of winter or it will be complete summer. See, many times you have come across forest fires. Why that does happen? Because of excess heat from the sun. But neither need be our fate. It's the time to make peace with the planet. So this is what Al Gore says. Let us not reach that end where we die either because of fire or ice. Let us make peace. Let us try to have harmonious relationship with earth. We must quickly mobilize our civilization with the urgency and resolve that has previously been seen only when nations mobilize for war. See, he's trying to say when there is war, all the entire population of the nation or all the citizens act quickly, mobilize themselves quickly. Okay, but the same kind of enthusiasm is not found amongst the citizens when it comes to nature. So he says that kind of mobilization, war mobilization that we need in order to save environment. These prior struggles for survival were won when leaders found words at the 11th hour that released a mighty surge of courage, hope, and readiness to sacrifice for a protracted and mortal challenge. 11th hour means at the end moment. So earlier struggles for survival became successful because leaders took appropriate decision in an appropriate point of time, and they were ready to sacrifice their self-interestedness. Similarly, the leaders of the world today should sacrifice their self-interest and should focus towards preserving and conserving nature. These were not comforting and misleading assurances that the threat was not real or imminent, that it would affect others but not ourselves, that ordinary life might be lived even in the presence of extraordinary threat, that providence could be trusted to do for us what we would not do for ourselves. So he's trying to say we should not be complacent, thinking that the impact of climate change will be on somebody else, will be on the poor or on the rich or people living the coastal area. No, it is this impact of climate change will threaten everybody on the same level. Nobody can escape from its impact. For example, if you do in Bengaluru itself, if you take into consideration, the groundwater level has depleted. Okay, and most of the apartment complexes and even individual houses are dependent on tankers. This is a better example of climate change. Okay, that people in urban areas can relate to. So instead of, and how long can you proceed with it? If there is no water, continuous water supply in another 10-20 years, the entire groundwater will get depleted, and even on tankers you can't depend. Okay, that is why the concept of rainwater harvesting and all those have come into existence. These were not comforting and misleading assurances that the threat was not real or imminent, that it would affect others, but this is done. No, these were calls to come to the defense of the common future. Look at this expression, use all these expressions in your answers. Defense of the common future. So all of us should enact in order to save our common future, or in order to save our future for our future generation. They were calls upon the courage, generosity, and strength of entire peoples, citizens of every class and condition, who were ready to stand against the threat once asked to do so. Our enemies in those times calculated that free people would not rise to challenge. They were, of course, catastrophically wrong. So what do you understand by this? He says, we have to fight for our common future, and citizens of every class and condition who are ready to stand against the threat once asked to do so. So whoever has concern towards the nature should fight to protect nature. Our enemies in those times calculated that free people would not rise to the challenge. They were, of course, catastrophically wrong. He is trying to say that the enemies of this climate change are of the opinion that common people can't do anything, and common people are described as free people here, and they will not act. And he says, according to him, it is completely wrong. And most of these conservation activities is done by common public than government itself. Now comes the threat of climate crisis, a threat that is real, rising, and imminent, and universal. Once again, it is the 11th hour. 11th hour means peak time. If you miss this, you will lose, like that. The penalties for ignoring this challenge are immense and growing, and at some near point would be unsustainable and unrecoverable. For now, we still have the power to choose our fate, and the remaining question is only this: have we the will to act vigorously and in time, or will we remain imprisoned by a dangerous illusion? So he says, one initially he talked about climate change. Now he's talking about climate crisis, which is real and imminent. He says the penalties for ignoring this challenge are immense and growing, and at some near point would be unsustainable and unrecoverable. He says, if we do not address this crisis related to climate, the problems that we face will be irreversible. We can't avoid this problem in future. He says, for now, we still have the power to choose our fate. He says, the time is not up. Okay, we still have time. Okay, we still have time to choose our fate. So what are the options that we have? Have we the will to act vigorously and in time, or will we remain imprisoned by a dangerous illusion? What is a dangerous illusion? That nothing is going to happen in short future. Mahatma Gandhi awakened the largest democracy on earth and forced a shared resolve with what he called satyagraha or truth force. See, imagine the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi or the principles of Mahatma Gandhi. Al Gore, a US presidential candidate, is quoting Mahatma Gandhi here in his speech. Awaken the largest democracy on earth, he is talking about India, and force a shared resolve with what he called satyagraha or truth force. So he's trying to use the freedom struggle, Indian freedom struggle, through which India gained freedom, that is through satyagraha, the same kind of unity we should exhibit when it comes to climate change, he says. In every land, the truth, once known, has the power to set us free. Truth also has the power to unite us and bridge the distance between me and we, creating the basis for common effort and shared responsibility. So he insists on common effort and shared responsibility. There is an African proverb that says, if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We need to go far quickly. So he makes a reference to the African proverb also. He says, we have to go quickly also, and we have to go together also. We must abandon. See, you should be aware of all the references that he makes. Okay, he makes references of Alfred Nobel, Mahatma Gandhi, African proverb, and quite other references. We must abandon the conceit that individual isolated private actions are the answer. They can and do help, but they will not take us far enough without collective action. He says, don't be fooled thinking that if I do individually, it will contribute a lot to the society. No, though it will do, but its contribution to the society is very minimal. We have to act collectively. At the same time, we must ensure that in mobilizing globally, we do not invite the establishment of ideological conformity and a new lockstepism. He says, we should do away with our ideological differences. Okay, we should, for example, America is much of capitalistic country, whereas China, Russia are communist countries. Now there are no watertight compartments for them also. China is extending its business across the world, and America is providing lot of measures, proactive measures to save, especially the healthcare system during the Obama administration is more of a communist approach. So he says we should not take into consideration the ideological differences while we are fighting to protect Earth. That means adopting principles, values, laws, and treaties that release creativity and initiative at every level of society in multifold responses, originating concurrently and spontaneously. So he also tried to convey that many times what happens, the inventions done in the advanced countries is not shared free of cost to the developing countries or the underdeveloped countries. For example, if Australia or America has come up with wonderful solar technology, utilization of solar technology, they have to share it to the developed countries and the underdeveloping countries so that the impact of climate change is less. But what they do out of business concerns, they will not share, or either they will price it at a high cost, which these people can't afford. So he's talking about all these things. This new consciousness requires expanding the possibilities inherent in all humanity. The innovators who will devise a new way to harness the sun's energy for pennies or invent an engine that's carbon negative may live in Lagos or Mumbai or Montevideo. So he's trying to say the new consciousness requires expanding the possibilities inherent in all humanity. He suggests each and every individual should contribute in protecting the nature, in reducing the impact of climate change. He says the innovators could be in any part of the world. They should be encouraged. So what is that he's trying to say? You should devise a new way to harness the sun's energy for pennies, or invent an engine that's carbon negative. He's trying to say you should develop a technology which can extract sun's energy to the maximum extent. For pennies means for smaller amount, or invent an engine that is carbon negative. So such people, such ideas could come from anywhere. That's why intellectual IP rights, intellectual property all came into existence. We must ensure that entrepreneurs and inventors everywhere on the globe have the chance to change the world. So you all are future entrepreneurs. Think from the perspective of contributing something to society. Later you get name, fame, and money also. So being future entrepreneurs, I want you people to think on these lines. So that is why Avishkar was implemented. When we unite for a moral purpose that is manifestly good and true, the spiritual energy unleashed can transform us. See, he says, when your moral purpose is true, you get the energy which can transform anybody. The generation that defeated fascism throughout the world in the 1940s found in rising to meet their awesome challenge that they had gained the moral authority and long-term vision to launch the Marshall Plan, the United Nations, and a new level of global cooperation and foresight that unified Europe and facilitated the emergence of democracy and prosperity in Germany, Japan, Italy, and much of the world. One of their visionary leaders said, "It is time we steer by the stars and not by the lights of every passing ship." So he says, the younger generation during the time of fascism in 1940s came up with a plan, that is the formation of United Nations. This formation of United Nations has led to the establishment of peace across the world. Similarly, he says we have to come up with a plan, we have to come up with an organization or an idea where all of us across the globe can think of preserving the climate. One of their visionary leaders, what did they say? It is time we steered by the stars and not by the lights of every passing ship. So he says we should have one common goal. What is the gist of this? He says we should have one common goal and we should not be distracted. And we can't have our own individual goals when it comes to climate change. For example, if India preserves climate, it doesn't mean Indian climate will become good. Okay, the climate or the clouds, as you know, keeps moving. It will impact the entire subcontinent, even across the globe also. So he says there